Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Mobility Outlook Dialogues. In this first of our series of discussions, we take a deeper look at the subject of creating more resilient supply chains. What must the industry do? Thank you all for joining in. The automotive supply chain is one of the most complex and diverse in the world, second only to perhaps the electronic sector in terms of the geographical spread of suppliers, manufacturers, and third-party logistics providers. While globalization has played its role, changes in manufacturing processes, disruptive new trends, and consumer demands have impacted the vehicle supply chain network for raw materials, components, as well as finished vehicles. This has meant, of course, a larger focus on optimizing manufacturing and distribution, minimizing costs, and ensuring that parts and products are shipped at the right time. Any disruption anywhere in the world first impacts the supply chain, eventually impacting the manufacturing operations. The disruptions are more so in the current scenario as the whole world is distressed by the pandemic, shipping disruptions, container shortages, port congestion, fire accidents, and the vagaries of weather. Is there a solution to mitigate these challenges? The COVID-19 pandemic has drastically changed the way supply chains operate and has highlighted some of the frailties of the system. Likewise, natural disasters like the ones in Japan and Thailand in 2011 disrupted supply chains worldwide and exposed companies' reliance on single source of supply. Most companies have, of course, built highly resilient networks today and have better visibility and the ability to switch sourcing, manufacturing, and distribution activities around quickly. However, there are many challenges that continue to plague the automotive supply chain. What should be the strategies that prepare OEMs, suppliers, supply chain providers, and the government better? How can technologies enable optimum performance and efficiency? How must the sector rebalance the cost of efficiency and resilience? To discuss these subjects in details, we have with us today an eminent panel of speakers. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Rajesh Khatri, VP Operations, Passenger Vehicle Unit, Tata Motors. Mr. Khatri, welcome.
Thank you.
We have Mr. Rajiv Gera, he's a Senior Vice President and Head Group Business Development at Anand. Mr. Sivasailam N, a retired IAS officer, and he's currently the administrative member with the Karnataka State Administrative Tribunal. Mr. Jishan Mukhi is a Director, Customer Experience at Maersk, South Asia, and Mr. Suresh Ramani, Country Head and COO, Auto Engineering Industrials at TVS Supply Chain Solutions. First, before we start, let's look at some house rules. I'm going to split this discussion today into three parts. The first will be, I'll start off with inviting the panelists to share their initial thoughts on the subject, followed by a discussion among the panelists. At the end, I'm going to reserve about 10 to 12 minutes to invite some questions from our delegates today. I'd request all our delegates, by default, your mics are being put on mute, but should you wish to ask a question, please use the chat box in this platform, and I'll pick up your questions one by one. So gentlemen, if I can start off, maybe I'll start off with you, Mr. Khatri. Your initial thoughts on the subject that we have for discussion today.
Yeah, thank you, Devanshu, first of all, for having me on the panel this afternoon. And it's a real pleasure to be with this esteemed members of the panel. So I take this opportunity for initially introducing how Tata Motors has been progressing over the last 1 year, which has been really unprecedented, I would say, as far as the conditions are concerned post the COVID. I think we have grown very rapidly and retained our number 3 position throughout the, let's say, the period post-COVID. Ever since the first unlock happened on May 17, I think since then we have never looked back, and we have retained the number 3 position in the passenger vehicle industry. So that's a very, very, very proud moment for us. I think we are known for making India's safest cars. All of us are, pretty aware of it. That's where we have created a niche, and We build cars for our customers and we care for our customers, and that's why we take pride in building the safest cars. We are also leaders in electric vehicles with a market share of almost 70% in the country. So that's also another a lead that we have taken in terms of serving the nation's people. I think with the manufacturing plants which have been located in Pune as well as in Sanand, based in Gujarat, I think our supply chain is spread across the country with also a few global suppliers who form the part of the supply chain. Like in most other automotive OEMs, I would say the supply chains traditionally have been linear. They are legacy oriented, monolithic, which means they are based on single source suppliers primarily, and the focus has been more on scale and cost. Now, this is where I'm talking about where we are in a large way. Maybe if I would describe the position almost about 1 year back. And Dipanshu, in your initial address, you talked about the resilience of the, let's say, the industry basis the experience that probably was gained in 2011-12 after the Japanese event. I fear that probably the impact of that particular incident was not as severe as what has been the current situation, and as a result, probably the industry did take some knee-jerk measures, but not good enough for us to be prepared for this sort of event. Would be my take on that. I think COVID-19's impact on the supply chains has been profoundly disruptive, to say the least. Reeling under the sudden lockdowns, fluctuations in demand and supply, logistics disruptions, shortages. I think the industry has been literally crippled. On the other hand, there has been a distinct shift in the customer preferences. Customers have now moved over to personal mobility. In fact, as all of us would appreciate, that in the era post-COVID, no one wanted to use shared mobility, right? So that is something which is a major shift that has happened. Customers are now opting for customization, which means customized vehicles is what they are seeking, and which means it calls for a different sort of approach from the industry. All these things are happening while we went into a lockdown and we are coming out of the lockdowns. So these are the challenges. Against all expectations, I would say the passenger vehicle industry has recovered by and large to the previous year levels. I'm referring to the FY 2021, where we did almost around 2.7 million vehicles, and the previous year was 2.8. So by and large, it had recovered to that level. And this is despite the lockdowns, despite the Q1 having been totally washed out. And this is only because of the shifts in the mobility preferences I talked about. It is also because of the pent-up demand which was there, where people realized the need for the safe cars, and that's where it has really, the passenger vehicle industry has actually benefited. Having said that, I would say innovation is driving softwareization and electrification. I use the word softwareization because in today's cars, you see a lot of softwares. I think there is no car without a software, and there is no car without the electronics chips and the semiconductors, which are finding more and more usage in the cars, without which today's cars would not be complete. So that has posed a different sort of a challenge, and this is leading to a huge cultural and organizational change on the whole, I would say. While we are grappling to come out of the COVID wave 2, I think the global shortages in semiconductors and also, as you rightly said, Dipanshu, the growing demand of the commodities continues to be a growing challenge in the near term and the medium term. Why I say medium term? Because we really are not very sure when the situation normalizes. So to that extent, I would say that presently, if I ask, most of the business heads would be strategizing effective business continuity plans with supply chain at its core. There is a dire need for a very agile, productive, digital, resilient, and a sustainable supply chain. Now, these are the 5 demands of the current supply chain which are emerging, And unless we are able to provide these five, attributes in the supply chain, I'm afraid that we will not be ready for the future. And it is those who are ready on these aspects who will always have an edge. I would also say that adopting a digitally integrated and collaborative approach with our supply chain would always provide an edge. And those who are able to adopt it and do it would have a, a distinct advantage. I would also say that, proactive risk management, not reactive, because today the entire globe has been reacting to the situation that has emerged. But what is the learning for all of us is that, we have to be proactive in the risk management in terms of creating collaborative networks across the supply chains, ranging right from, the demand, supply, the logistics, the production, everything put together would put us in a better position in terms of tackling such uncertainties in future. It is, I would say, call for a total supply chain transformation. That's what I see it as. And I'm sure that, like us, most of the OEMs within the automotive industry, as well as the other industries, have realized this, and they are very well on their way for digitalization and taking all the measures to be ready for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Khatri, for your initial comments. Very pertinent points that you have raised. We'll sure come back for some questions later. I'll come to you, Mr. Gera, your initial thoughts on the subject that we have today.
Yeah, thanks, Divanshu, and thanks for having me here for this panel discussion. I represent Anand Group, and we are into auto component manufacturing with 19 companies and 59 plants spread across India. We have a vast product portfolio which covers basically chassis, engine, transmission, safety, and cabin module components. And happy to share that we are actually in all the segments of the automotive, that is passenger vehicle, commercial vehicle, two-wheeler, and of course of tractors. Now, as I reflect on the year gone by and list the issues and the challenges we faced, I think we faced issues in the first wave, the second wave, and of course the V-shaped recovery which came in between. So it also created its own challenges and learnings. So as I see, being a component industry, we have the exposure. If I talk about the exposure, we have exposure of buying components across the globe. Of course, Indian suppliers, our tier 2s, our tier 3s. And as I see, the last 1.5 years, the challenges, of course, the logistics, that's one of the major ones. Anand Group as a whole, we are almost 18% import dependent supplier. So you can understand our fate. 18% of imports, and containers are not available, ships are not available, lead time doubled, tripled, costs are doubled, tripled. So big challenge. Now if we go back to the drawing board, the way we designed our supply chain strategy. So the supply chain strategy very clearly said import +1. But we've been actually very slow in getting onto it, but this pandemic has taught us and brought the pace into the speed of developing local suppliers, within the state suppliers or within the hub suppliers. So that is something which we have actually learned, and we have started doing it very fast, aggressively. At the same time, other challenges, we also have pockets of excellence centers, we call them, like one particular supplier sitting in Czechoslovakia supplying across the globe, like a typical chip manufacturer sitting in US supplying to everywhere. And then now this supplier is gone, we are all struggling. So lessons are learned, at least on this particular front, which is import +1. We earlier used to say China +1, now it is import +1. So that is actually has taken pace, and we have started working on the strategy. Mr. Khatri, you rightly mentioned about the risk management at the supplier end. We all, by process, we all do ERM, entrepreneurial resource management. We all do it, but how seriously we do it and how profoundly the points are captured, but how profoundly do we take actions on those points? Very well said, Mr. Khatri. I think that's something wherein, though it's there on the drawing board, it's there, we have written it, but I mean, the actions are missing, which have suddenly taken place, and we are there. Thirdly, of course, we were discussing even before the call, I mean, the commodity prices. I think we've been hit badly. We've been hit badly. As a component manufacturer, we generally look at the OEM to compensate the commodity price increases, because we generally have those kind of indexing with the OEMs. So we, being at a position, a bigger company, we can still hold on to, and we can still manage these price increases which are happening at the commodity, be it a steel, rubber, or rare earth material. So there is a major increase. Now the challenge comes with our tier twos and tier threes, wherein they have to absorb these hefty increases month on month, and at the same time the payments are asked in advance. So I don't know the reason. At times I think about it. I think probably PLI to be blamed. I mean, the exports have risen so well in steel industry specifically, and we are actually we have a demand supply gap, major gap in India, which should have been looked before going in for such kind of schemes. So, but anyhow, I mean, that's a challenge, and really we are struggling, and that is an area. Though we are tying up with banks, we are helping our suppliers ourselves, but that's a challenge situation. That's really a challenge situation. And of course, the people front, we all faced. I mean, everybody went back to his home. They wanted to be there with their families, and then that's a challenge. But there, I mean, the strategy, I believe, for the state I think should work, wherein people are generally closer to their hometowns, and the industrial hubs are with proximity to their hometowns. I think will surely work out. So I'll say, I mean, the challenges are still there. The pace of certain issues, I mean, Mr. Khatri, you mentioned about digitization. The pace has taken, I mean, the speed is much more, or is 10 times the way we were doing things earlier to digitize ourselves or to automate ourselves. So that pace has come in the system. But however, there are things which we still need to address. We did have our knee-jerk reactions to control the things at that time, because you cannot let a customer down. You have to supply. And we took some shortcuts. We managed the supplies, but still the long-term issue remains, which we are trying to address slowly and steadily. And I hope the pandemic has shaken up and given us a lot of learnings to actually act on. So I think that's it. Dipanshu will catch up later. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Gera. Again, I mean, there are multiple, there are so much commonality in thoughts between what Mr. Khatri said and you said. There are challenges for sure. I'll come to Mr. Ramani. How do you look at this? Your initial thoughts, please.
Yeah, so I think I'd look at it, we are a service provider. I think the others are the people we provide services to. And one of the challenges we often face is that we handle a lot of the variabilizing risk, which comes as being a 3PL. So irrespective of the condition of the market, if you need to provide the vehicles, you need to provide the people, you need to provide the quality, you need to do it no matter what. And we are no different. We have the same pressures and challenges that were mentioned by Mr. Khatri and Shira. I will look at it a little differently. I think the COVID situation has probably caused us to discuss this topic. But I think this is a topic, and I think it was expressed in different ways by both Rajiv ji and Rajesh ji. I think there are three basic elements that we need to look at all the time when we deal with how to run corporations. The first is what I refer to as manageable or routine risks. Now, manageable or routine risk is something companies in India and across the world have done a great job of. This is to do with sourcing strategies, inventory planning models, technology implementation to be able to know in business as usual when there are variations of within plus minus 10%, how do you run it? And I think that is something that a very good job of that is done. And so that is not an issue. It is an issue if you have not invested yourself in foundation systems to be able to do it. But otherwise, that really is not an issue across the board. The second is things that come out of specific business demands or unexpected short-term challenges. So everybody's talking about the chip shortage. I think even Raju was mentioning it. It's a short-term issue. Obviously, somebody was sleeping at the wheel when this started, because this doesn't start now. It started sometime before, and somebody was sleeping at the wheel. And then when it came and hit, then global CEOs started to focus on it and try to find how to ration it. But I would still define it as a business exigency. It's like, for example, and Rajesh Khatriji will be in the best position to comment on it. Nexons are selling 3 times what they were selling last year. Now, there is a risk management element here, which is, have I got my suppliers ramped up? Have I got my production schedules done? This is the second kind of risk. And again, I think barring 1 or 2 events, which are like the chip event, by and large, people structure, because these are discussed in board meetings, these are discussed in regular reviews, right? Because growth is a nice thing to discuss, or a sudden drop is something that you have to inform advance. The thing that catches everybody unawares is really things which are, what I call unprecedented or force majeure kind of events. And COVID was one such. And there have been a few in the past. This is specifically a lot more impacting because it is over a much extended period of time. And in our case, it came in 2 waves. And so obviously, in this, it's not about how do you manage it. I would say, and I looked at what we did. I'd say this requires 2 things. One, which everybody talks about in their presentations but doesn't do, which is called business contingency planning. And that I don't know how much we do of. And therefore you get caught up with the absence of a BCP. So for example, I'm just, suppose something were to happen in Maharashtra and all suppliers in Maharashtra can't produce. What are you going to do? There should be some BCP for it. And I don't know how much of thought has been applied. I mean, Rajiv Gera is just, the thought of it is panicking him because his whole business will come to a standstill, right? But I'm saying BCP is all about thinking about these things. The issue is, are we both at the boardroom and at the operating review level thinking these things? Because these are not pleasant things to think about, right? Whatever state shuts down. But this is happening. And this is something that we must work on. I know IT companies think about it. They have a data center strategy that is built around some of these things. So I think that's one element is PCB. The second really is, because you can't predict this, are you setting up SWAT teams to deal with it? How exactly are you reaching out and solving this? Because when this happens, you have to change multiple things, right? You have to change how you get the parts from your supplier. You have to change the people who come and do the work for you. You have to change the way you store and communicate. There are so many things that change that it's not just an SOP that may exist in full. So how do you deal with this? How do you communicate with each other? How do you establish a certain level of understanding so that all elements, all stakeholders kind of work? So for example, I'll again take this example of Nexon. So when the wave was at its peak in April, we hypothesized that, Maharashtra, which was worst hit, will actually have drop in production volume. But you know what? They wanted second shift for Nexon. So now we don't know what to do, because guess what? All of my trained manpower has gone off to Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh. How do I get people to produce a damn car? They want to produce 400 of them a day, right? So now we had to actually improvise the way we looked at it. We moved people from projects which didn't have work. We caught people locally. Now, when you bring people locally, they're untrained. A, they're untrained. B, a lot of them are not used to factory work. So, but you need a SWAT team approach to solve this. Unless and until we get into that SWAT team approach to address this for events like, events like this, force majeure equivalent events, or or black swan events. I think that's probably a better word to use, a black swan event. There is no way that you can actually get past this. Um, I'm not saying that you can't have a strategy for it. All I'm saying is your strategy has to be literally by the seat of your pants when it happens, and it has to happen right then. And so I'd say, resilience here is not so much knowing how much your supply chain can flex, but resilience here is how quickly you can reorganize your team into a SWOT format and get things done, whatever it takes. That to me is resilience in such an environment. In all other environments, you have systems. For example, I was just making a note that, if you have a good global sourcing strategy, you have multiple suppliers, you can deal with issues. One of the business imperatives that may come up or is coming up in part is, people are trying to move production from China into India. It has serious issues, right? You have to create capacity in India. The cost may be different. You'll have to go through the entire PPAP process of approving. These are things which I think are manageable. There will be short-term challenges, but these are manageable. But when you have a black swan event like this, unless and until you have either a BCP or you have a SWAT team approach to solving it, where you're willing to change everything, turn everything on its head, it becomes very difficult to address the situations such as this. So with that, I leave this. I've concluded what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Excellent thoughts. I'll come to Jishan now because, Jishan, taking off from what Mr. Ramani said, what are your thoughts? Have you faced similar challenges? Do you have similar thoughts around how to really turn this around?
Yeah, thanks, Dipanshu, and I'm really happy to be part of this esteemed panel today. As you know, Maersk is one of the largest shipping companies in the world, and of course, also a fairly large player in logistics, especially in the auto segment. And I'll take off from what Mr. Rajiv said, right? COVID for us has been one of the biggest learnings, right, or lesson givers for all of us, right? And we see that across industries, auto industry and shipping is no different. It has been extremely tough in terms of running a global network of ships, containers, ports, given the situation. And of course, we've seen, and also mentioned, right, the shortages of containers, the shortage of space, availability of, transportation, etc., has been really, really challenged. And some of the flaws in the global supply chain have actually, come to the fore as a result of, this pandemic. So just to sort of, break it down in terms of, how it's panned out. Of course, we saw demand fall off a cliff last year, when the COVID pandemic started, the lockdowns, etc. And really, at that point of time, we had no production going in, and we in fact had cargo lying at ports, which were imported, but factories, a lot of auto factories also shut, with no demand. And then, of course, like was mentioned, right? I think we really saw the demand recover in Q3, Q4, and in fact, not only in India but globally, we have seen unprecedented demand and some big shifts, like the one that was also mentioned by Mr. Khatri, right, on the shift from shared mobility, right? As in before COVID, we were all thinking this is going to, demand is not going to be there, and then it completely shifts, right, towards personal mobility, right? And then the auto sales going up, the demand for EV, electric vehicles growing, and it's completely shifted. So it's of course been fairly challenging over there. And we saw that demand coming at us. I don't think any of the service providers, including shipping lines, were prepared for that kind of a rebound, and that sort of completely put everyone at surprise. And suddenly we had, we not planned for it, and visibility also on the forward-looking projections from customers was very, very low. In fact, even today, it's only just about better, but it's been a challenge to forecast, what's going to happen in the next 3 to 4 months in such a volatile environment. So that's been a bit of, what the issues are. From a shipping line perspective, it's been very, very difficult, especially with ports facing COVID, port workers not being able to turn up because of COVID clusters, transportation issues, labor moving off, drivers, similar issues, right? So it's been fairly challenging to operate, and that of course has created a shortage. Despite all the ships actually in the world being there on the seas, it's created a shortage of containers and shortage of space because they're probably always in the wrong place. And that's really been the highlight, and that's of course led to significant price escalation as well. And this is of course something that was quite unexpected in the overall scheme of things. So the focus, of course, is like mentioned by others as well, right? Is how do you make your supply chain more agile, more dynamic, more resilient, more sustainable? And there's been a lot of discussions over here, right? As in especially in the auto industry, which is so used to having a precise, just-in-time scheduling. And in short term, like also Mr. Suresh mentioned, right? Companies have actually done a fantastic job. They've done a really, really good work in terms of, adjusting the buffer stock, diversifying supplier base, and doing whatever can be done, right, to meet the demand and to bridge the gaps. But if you look at it from a longer term, then there are certain things that definitely we see as logistics players, where the industry should look at, right, and one of them being about how do we actually have stronger collaboration and integrated logistics providers, to enable, and everyone mentioned about digitization. How do you actually make decisions faster? And that is something that is coming out as a key theme. Integration, data, collaboration, especially with suppliers. I think auto industry is one of them, which has done a very good job with the supplier side, right, with the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, and how do you actually extend some of that to the logistics, and I think that's a theme that is definitely worth exploring. Also, I think moving to more dynamic supply chain and looking at similar to what fashion does, for example, in the retail and fashion industry, you've got the t-shirts and the shirts, which are sort of moving on a different supply chain model, whereas the fast fashion actually moves differently. So how do you actually plan the variable supply chains, right, for some of the tires, wheels, shock absorbers, which could probably be more rigid supply chains, but then we have more agile for supply chains for some of the other products. And then also looking at moving away from traditional supply chains, which are spread across various partners, and each having individual SLAs, right, to looking at it as a whole, and also having more partnerships with logistics service providers, where there is an ambition to have a lot more of a business contingency planning, also more skin in the game. And I think these have been some of the learnings and from this pandemic, and of course these thoughts are developing as we go along, but this is what we are hearing from most of our customers in this segment.
Thank you. I mean, you've actually brought about a subject that I'm going to pick up a little later, that is about collaboration and the importance of collaboration, when we think about the future of supply chain. Mr. Sivasailam, I'm going to come to you. I've come to you last because I wanted to get the perspective from the OEMs, the tier 1s, as well as the logistics partners. Your thoughts on the subject, sir?
First of all, thanks for having me over. It's always a pleasure coming back to in the midst of all of you. I also want to tell you that subsequent to my retirement from the service last year, I'm now the honorary chairman of CILT, Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, which is a neutral forum. And I would strongly request that people like you will enhance its presence, because it is a neutral forum intended to address issues. And it does not have a specific agenda. But then addressing specific agenda of industries cannot be said to be a vested interest. It's a legitimate interest to pursue. And that's what is the work of that organizations which we have. So I thought of letting you know. So I'm very much connected with the logistics sector, continue to do so. It's really fantastic. There is no dull moment in this sector, let me tell you that. Having said that, first I would like to start off with a small comment which Mr. Rajesh Khatri made, telling that, Tata Motors has regained its third position. Mind you, it's not without reason. And the reason is behind you. Connecting aspirations. Because that's what has been done. When it did not connect with aspirations, it lost. But when it started connecting with aspirations, it won. And the result was told by Rajiv Gera, your supplies are 3 times more than last year. And we are not even in the 6th month. And it is already 3 times. So that's where it is. So you just imagine the level. So you hit the nail on the head, and as the aim has it, that it's not that customers are just purchased any car because it's a car. They purchase a car because it's aspirational and things like that, and that's what has happened to Tata Motors stock of offers. At least over the last 1 year, if I can say so. And therefore, it's not something which is a fluke, or that it has been, you just made it by accident. I think it's because of a lot of hard work by you guys. And that's what makes India proud, if Tata Motors does well. And another thing which we need to know, we are all belonging to a generation, quite a few of you are at least 1 generation or 2 generations behind me. But I need to take you back to the generation when I started work, or in the first decade of the service which I had. Let me tell you, automotive sector just did not matter. But is it this case now? Today, the GDP is affected if the automotive sector goes down. And the GDP is badly affected, not just affected. Any sector which does not perform well, GDP gets affected. But if automotive sector does not get now, it impacts populations. It impacts livelihood of population. So that's the importance of the automotive sector today. So it is because of this that it's a sector today which cannot fail. And if it fails, the nation fails. And that is the level, at least it has come, we have come to realize it, at least from the 2015-16, around that budget, when automotive sector substantially contributed to this GDP, and a whole lot of downstream industries are actually dependent upon the of this sector, of the importance of this sector. So it is an important sector for the economy, and I'm pretty certain that the next generation of leaders like you would keep that that perspective in mind, because we are all a person who have seen the change which has happened, and people like you may not have seen the change. You are already knowing it's important, but it's very important to say that problems of the sector is likely to be transferred across sectors into other sectors, and the nation is likely to be affected by any lack of integration, or a lack of coordination, or a lack of any sort. As they say, as Ramani put it, somebody was sleeping on the wheel. I mean, if somebody sleeps on the wheel in the automotive sector, the nation will pay for it. So that's what it comes to. The third important thing, which is of great strategic interest, I think, which I need to bring it to you, to especially people like you who are the key guys in the sector, is it has taken up, the motor car is not new. It was there in the 30s, an industry which came up in the 30s. But it has taken 100 years for this country to achieve a stature in this, in the automobile industry, in what I would call an international stature in the automobile industry, or close to 100 years. We never had that thing. My request to you is that please be very careful when you look into the electric vehicle field. It should not become a red herring to deprive India of its leadership, of its top status in the automobile sector. And that is where supply chains, manufacturing guys like Anand, it's particularly important for you to ensure that India, whenever new technologies come, when new technologies take over, the world order changes. The order surrounding those products or commodities changes. It's very essential that when you are making the change, please don't make India sleep for another 70 years before I have an international supply chain, internationally vibrant automobile sector based on electric vehicles in this country. That will be disastrous. And that means, to use the term of Ramani, we are sleeping at the wheel. So therefore, when you are looking into these new areas, please ensure that you start building manufacturing supply chains, not just for India. Please, wherever anything is manufactured just for India, it is bound to fail. The reason is, if a small change in technology or a small incremental increase in technology takes place, you are out of the market. So it is necessary to be part of global supply chains. And that's my experience working in the telecom sector, where I served as special secretary. You need to be part of international chains. It's not important to be exclusive in its manufacture. Never look for exclusivity. Be part of international chains. Somebody like Tata knows the importance of being part of the international supply chains. But that's where we need to get those business elements as part of the futuristic supply chains. It is particularly important when you are entering the area of electric vehicles. Ensure that you are part of the global supply chain in every product or assembly that you are making. It is very important. Otherwise, the leadership of India or the importance of India in the automobile supply chain will decline quickly to our discomfort. And again, we may be facing another 70 years before anybody says, okay, we are moving to some other technology. Come on, let's shift the electric vehicle guys to India. So please don't become the dumping ground for certain technology. We managed to do that very well in the automotive sector, because we managed to get in a lot of design innovation in terms of and manufacturing, brought down the cost considerably, and that's how the later part of the industry. Presently, India is a very big automotive sector manufacturer, both for our economy as well as definitely for the world economy as well. So I thought of putting this very sober thought or a somber thought in the matter of electric vehicles and lead automobile sector mobility outlook. May please take note of it, create a methodology. You need to create a buzz on creating globally sustainable manufacturing chains. Please note, I am not talking about manufacture of A to Z in India only for India. It's India for the world. Where you don't have a philosophy of India for the world, you're unlikely to make any good. You might momentarily make a good product, but human brain being what it is, it will always become better. So, and at the next stage, we will lose out and our products will no longer be there because the supply chain will shift down. So this is a very important concept. I thought it's a very sombering thought. It's not, I thought in a forum like this, it's good to mention, because it's a closed door forum of people who are experts in this industry. And it is very important for you as the next generation of leaders. Of course, we have all left the arena, and people like you can make the difference. And this is just a sombering thought for you. The third aspect which I will pick up was also mentioned by three of my previous speakers: digital collaboration supply chains. And it was mentioned by Mr. Ramani, like, how do we do it? That's what I'm going to tell you. The question is, nowadays, the key element of managing this documentation, which is the key aspect of any supply chain, documentation is a very, very important aspect. It is best done through a blockchain-based portal or a platform system. Now, you can say, okay, everybody cannot develop a platform. Platform means what? Everybody. That is why it is called a platform. A platform is a place where everybody rides on it. And it is not possible for a single company even to create such platforms. It is so costly that it doesn't make public sense to that unit. But as a group or as individuals coming together, it makes great sense. So it is very essential that as an industry, you create a portal based on blockchains. The reason is, whatever you may say, supply chain works on documentation. When you transfer goods, you need to have a documentation. When you cross boundaries, it may even be a panchayat boundary. You need to you need to show the documentation, because regulation, as we all know, is a necessary evil. Although regulation may be a necessary evil, it does not mean that it should become it should swallow what is being regulated. It need not become a millstone under our neck, because regulation indeed is for us. But the person whom we have authorized to regulate, we can always support him through these. And this is where getting all your people into a single supply, into a portal. And obviously, I'm not trying to say that you keep sharing data of every company with everybody else. Of course, that's not the idea. I'm not at all intervening on what I would call data privacy. But it is very important to ensure that people are on the platform to transact. If I need to transact among people, it's there, so that it is also possible to transact with third parties. And that's a very important thing. It can only be done by collaboration. When you are talking about collaboration, it's not a very empty word. It has got very, very rich and very deep meaning. It has got value system into it, which means that groups like you need to join and say, no, this is my priority. I'll create it. I will get it integrated, so that when my commodity goes and some regulator wants to check it, we have full-fledged documentation for him, because regulation is for our purpose. We have created those regulators, and we need to facilitate them so that they don't become a millstone on us. The purpose of regulation is not to trouble us. This is a key element. And that,
Salam,
2 points.
Okay. All right, go ahead. Go
2
ahead,
points.
please. Yes. Go
ahead. Two related points. One is, when we talk about when we talk about these documentation, you as an industry are in a position to create a single document for multimodal transport. Why don't you do it? It's possible. Today, we ensure that we just hand it over, and then it is left to the 3PL guy who struggles his way through. Why don't you say, okay, we will create a multimodal document, and you go across it. It's a great way of facilitating. Let me tell you, it will also reduce a lot of hidden costs. A lot of hidden costs gets reduced. And you'll be surprised to know that in India, the logistics, even local transportation, even when you have to go abroad, you need to transport locally first. Even your local transportation is so costly, and most of it is largely on account of padding up. When you move from one mode to another mode, the amount of non-transparent way of transfer pricing which takes place is something which you need to do. My last issue is related to free trade warehousing zones and SEZs. This is, when you're going into the ecosystem of electric vehicles, it is better that as an industry, you start addressing this issue. Free trade warehousing zones and SEZs. Presently, the meaning of the word FTWZ and SEZ, when you look into the literature, it is different. But when you look at the law, it is different. Under law, both FTWZ and SEZ are nothing but customs bonded warehouses. They come under the Customs Act. Whereas the literature meaning of SEZ and FTWZ are that it is a territory in India where open manufacture is allowed and customs law does not apply. Indian customs law of duty payment and duty this thing is not applied. Only one thing which applies is anything can be brought in, which is any commodity can be brought in, which is not prohibited in this country. And any commodity can be manufactured, which is not prohibited for manufacture. That is the only two restrictions which the world knows about SEZs and FTWZ. But in India, we have interpreted it as part of the Customs Act. And therein lies this problem. And that may be the biggest impediment for India to be scaling up in the electric vehicle ecosystem, because you don't have a gram of lithium. Now, without the battery ecosystem with you, I mean, it's damn squib. Everything else already exists here. If you don't have the lithium manufacturing capability, you're going to be a vassal for your lifetime. Forget about 100 years. As long as electric vehicles last, you will. So this is an area where manufacturing needs to be encouraged, and it cannot be done unless and until we look at this concept of FTWZ and SEZ. I think this is one ecosystem which I thought I'll present it to you on a futuristic area for consideration of the leaders of today and tomorrow in the automotive sector, purely looking at it from the supply chain perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sivasailam. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of pertinent points for our panelists to sort of look at, take note of. I'll come to a couple of generic questions before I get to specifics. As a panel, what's your view on what should companies be doing to diversify their supply chain risks? For instance, future. Mr. Khatri, you talked about the importance of being proactive, right? Do you see a pressing need to re-engineer or remodel the global supply chain system? Is that a learning from this pandemic? Mr. Khatri, you'll have to unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. So I was saying, good question. Actually, there are many learnings out of this pandemic, and rightly so. Diversification, localization, these are some of the key words which would play a significant role. But before I go on to that, I would like to touch upon some very basic and elementary things which I think we as an industry, people are required to do. Because as Mr. Ramani mentioned earlier, that while the ERM, and I think Mr. Gera also mentioned earlier, while the ERMs are there in most of the companies, but they remain on paper. The enterprise risk management, it only is a very superficial activity. And I guess this pandemic has taught the managements the importance of ERM, and now it has got a very different name in terms of BCP. BCP is again more or less a reaction, or maybe it is a preparation, but it's a part of the overall enterprise risk management. And we need to be preparing this in a very, very robust way, having a very, very strong governance around it in terms of protecting the companies from such uncertainties that we have gone through in the recent past. And that is one key takeaway that we had actually coming out of this. Coming back to the supply chain, as I said, there were 5 key words that I used in the earlier response: the agility, the productivity, a very productive supply chain, the resilience. We talked about the digitalization as well as the sustainability. Right now, if I look at it, I think diversification is an integral part of it. And if I again go back and try to analyze where we have come from, like when we were preparing the BCP in the just before the wave 1, in fact, the COVID lockdowns happened first in China, right? And it's that time that in anticipation, I think some of the progressive teams, some of the progressive companies started doing BCP in case it comes to our shores, which it did, right? So we were luckily a part of that team, and we were working on the BCP in a very, very focused and dedicated manner sometime beginning of February, so that by the time we entered into a lockdown on March 23rd, we had our BCP plan ready. And that is what saved the day for us. And that's the reason why I recall May 17th was the first unlock. And since that day, we have not looked back. We were so prepared for it. Mr. Ramani talked about the SWOT, approach. Precisely, that's what was really adopted. But it was, SWOT comes in terms of execution. And it is only well-planned activities which can be well executed. So the BCP process was all about planning while we were under lockdown, envisaging, anticipating, and then working towards trying to mitigate the risk. So in that, there was a, what I call is an alternate strategy. Yeah, when you say diversification, you name it as an alternate strategy. So whether it is the parts, whether it is the processes, whether it is the suppliers, whether it is the locations where we make the parts, right? So it was extremely important. I think it's a big takeaway that there should be diversification. I made a reference to the earlier, remark regarding the then state of supply chain, which I mentioned about it being monolithic, which means that the supply chains were focused on a single source supply, right? And that was more driven by the scale and the cost and so on. But today, I think it has been exposed because depending on one supplier, and if because of this unprecedented event, the capacities are short with the supplier, I think your entire business is then exposed to a single source. Whereas if you would have had a strategy which was on the basis of multi-sources, multi-location, which is what diversification is all about, I think we would be better prepared to take care of this, eventuality. The other part which comes in to my mind is that, just before the BCP started, I'm referring to the wave one again, we never had mapped all our suppliers. And what I mean by that is, generally when we say suppliers, we restrict our visibility to the tier ones. We didn't have tier two visibility in many cases. And that's what transformed into a supplier grid, right? So supplier grid and supplier network, these are the two terms which are coming out, which now it is imperative that every organization, at least we believe that we should have at every given time, so that we have at least a complete visibility of our supply chain, the value chain that is across, and in case of a problem, we know where what buffers are required to be provided, where diversification is required, what is the risk. So a very fundamental and elementary thing is that of a supplier grid. And then of course there was a part related to criticality index. So of course, even a nut not being available on a given day can stop the production. But notwithstanding that, there are certain critical parts where the diversification strategy is required to be adopted. So creating a criticality index basis certain parameters would be very, very helpful for the teams to really churn out an effective diversification strategy, as you said. So completely agree with you. That's one thing which is a very important and key element of the strategies emerging going forward.
Is it the same for you, Mr. Gera? From Mr. Khatri talked about how Tata Motors has sort of re-engineered and looked at creating supplier grade supply network. Are you looking at re-engineering your domain with tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers?
Yeah, so as I said, earlier also, the philosophy to some extent remains the same. What Mr. Khatri just now mentioned. The dependency on a single source has actually hit us badly, and that's why I said, import plus one. So that is a clear strategy which we are working on. That in any case we have import source available, and we also have a local source available. Within India. At the same time, as far as the Indian sources are concerned, the Indian suppliers, especially, we're talking about the tier 2s and tier 3s as concerned. So our tier 1s, or for Tata Motors tier 2s, so there we do have shifted to a strategy of which we call a hub-wise strategy. So what we are trying to do is that we have 3 hubs wherein our major plants are located. One is Pune, Chennai, and of course in NCR, which is Gurgaon. So now our strategy is, what we are doing is, we are irrespective of the company, we are going by the commodity. For example, now in this particular region in NCR, we have 6 of our companies, which is producing, be it shock absorber, be it Excel, or any other product for that matter. Now we are creating focused supplier bases here. Now I have a supplier base, a rubber supplier here in northern India, who will cater to these 6 companies. And a similar supplier will be there in Pune, and the similar supplier will be there in Chennai. So we are crossing those company boundaries, and we are actually getting into the zonal boundaries to ensure that we have suppliers in each of these zones. So when I said that, so there could be a supplier who is manufacturing a part A in northern India, and there could be a supplier X in Chennai who will also be manufacturing the same component. So we do have a diversification of the component. I mean, we can buy it from, in case of exigency, the 3 locations are available with the suppliers with the similar tooling, though there is an additional investment which is because of the tooling, but we are going ahead with that, and we are going by this hub strategy to ensure that we have a diversified supplier base as far as T2 and T3 are concerned.
Okay.
So this is wherever we have a possibility. Now there are certain suppliers which are wherein we do not have a possibility actually to shift. So that is a longest lead time kind of a component which we are looking at. We talked about semiconductors, so it is a single supplier base, and the lead time which we see is almost a 2-year lead time before we actually develop a local source or an alternate source. So we are working on that strategy. So, but as of now, that is in the paper, and we are working on it as far as strategy is concerned. But the time period to actually implement would be at least 2 years down the line.
Okay.
So that is what I think. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Ramani and also Mr. Mukhi, this question is for you. From a supply chain strategy perspective, do you see the necessity to, let's say, reevaluate the lean or just-in-time inventory strategies? Is that something that you think the industry must look at? If you can unmute yourself, please, Mr. Ramani.
Yeah. Sorry, I was muted. Yeah. So look, obviously, one of the easiest ways to handle business exigencies is to let go of lean and keep stock. It's just about the easiest way to work. But I think lean is not just about inventory, right? Lean is about culture of how you work. How do you stretch every rupee? How do you stretch every resource so you get it right? I hope I'm audible. I think the internet is little, yeah.
Yes, you are audible.
I don't think that this is the time to revisit lean. I think there are 2 key elements which will help manage, and this is a business exigency. This is really not a black swan kind of a situation we're talking about here. I find that as we converse, we are switching seamlessly between business exigency to a black swan. So they are 2 different things. But in a business exigency, I think if you're and people talk about digitizing. If you have digitized well and you have an established solid system of collaborating with your key stakeholders, you can still sustain lean. Don't confuse this with black swan, right? In black swan events, nothing works. If there is no worker, what are you going to work, right? So you leave that aside for a bit. I don't think there is a need to. If anything, you can get leaner. And you can get leaner in multiple ways. You can get leaner in terms of number of people required to do things. You can get leaner in terms of what's the buffer of manpower you need or parts or material you need to execute a certain job. You can get leaner in terms of how much for every rupee that you spend, how do you execute in your forward supply chain, because you have so much more data with you, right? I think one of the things we're missing this entire piece is what we can do with the data that we have with us. How do we analyze it? I think this is not the era. The era of ERPs and systems and collaborative things is gone. It's now the era of data, right? If Mr. Ambani thinks it's the new oil, then it must be the new oil, right? So I think if you get the data story right, I don't think there is any way on which you can consider compromising. And I noticed Mr. Rajesh Khatri was vigorously nodding his head in agreement.
Well, I wanted to add something to what Ramani was saying, with your kind permission, Himanshu.
Yeah.
Lean is not just about inventory management. Lean is also about, doing your business more productively.
Correct.
It's all about, earning profits and being cost competitive. And I would say, there is a very good phrase and saying that necessity is the mother of invention.
Yep.
Right? And when we all have been required to work it with 50% capacity, but yet maximize the output, how else can you do it other than lean? Right? So this was a very, I'm speaking from my personal experience of the last couple of months. We could not have done over the last couple of years. We could do it in the last couple of months. And it is only because we were forced to apply lean. There was no other choice. So I think lean is not only about creating the buffers. Of course, where in the supply chain it is necessary to create additional buffers because of the contingencies and exigencies as was expressed, that's inevitable. But notwithstanding that, on a holistic view, from a business perspective, I think lean still has its own place in the business.
So I think on a little bit of a lighter vein, I think when you go through these kind of situations where you don't have enough manpower, you can extract more. I'm just saying in hand. I think everybody's in agreement. I can see that,
Exactly.
and it's a good thing, right? What I earlier thought I required 500 people to do, I now realize, I can probably do it in 400. And now it's a question of deciding the 100 who benefits. So I pass it on to Tata Motors or ask Khadri Saab ki mujhe bhi 50% de do. So, but the point I make is that lean is a lot more than inventory. Lean is about how you approach everything that you do. There is enough data out there for you to be able to analyze and know what can happen, how things can happen, where things can go right, where things can go wrong. You can apply that. And I don't know how much everybody's invested in it. Some organizations are. I mean, the most fascinating examples of organizations do it are all the new age companies, the FANGs of the world, and so on and so forth. And surely, as an industry, we have enormous amounts of data. I don't think there'll be anybody with more data on customer, on parts and resources, on factory and production variations than Tata Group would have, right? So I think there is, if you focus on the right things, I don't think you have to compromise on the core concepts. I always believe this, right? The core concepts or the traditional Toyota way of doing things, that will never go. You just do it a lot better and a lot more effectively in spite of variations.
Yeah, your points, absolute spot on. That would be one of my questions for sure on data, and not just data. We look at technology as a wider spectrum. Mr. Sivashalam talked about possibility of bringing in blockchain into the supply chain sector. So maybe Mr. Mukhi, you could possibly speak on that. How is Maersk approaching data? How are you using data to actually streamline and improve upon your services and efficiency?
Thanks, Dipanshu. And I think I completely agree, firstly, with the comment.
1 minute, I just want to add, is that I think Maersk was the first to try out blockchain with IBM, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Can I make a intervention here? At the onset of pandemic, in fact, I had requested the top management of Maersk to introduce the online documentation system for the thing, and they did it within a week. That was the first time in India that this was introduced. And since the blockchain as a concept could not be done because it involved a platform, it was agreed that if a document is sent from a registered email address, which was known to the freight forwarders and the custom brokers and the 3PL guys and the port guys, and if it was from a registered email address, it was generally agreed. And of course, I had to underwrite it, and which I did. And that's how the whole thing went on. And I do believe that now they have introduced this as a regular system, and it has gone over to all the shipping lines, largely spearheaded by Maersk. And that is, and incidentally, Maersk is represented on my board in CILT. Their chief executive is on my board in CILT.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sivasalam and Mr. Ramani. I think thanks so much. Really helps us, be motivated about doing innovative things. But back to Dipanshu, your question, right? I think the first one about lean, and I completely agree. With what Mr. Ramani and what Mr. Khatri said, it's more than it's about changing your way of thinking. Rather than saying, okay, this is and lean is much more than just inventory management. And it's for us, it's about how do we actually rethink some of these things. So from what Mr. Khatri said, also, right, I think when you diversify your supply base, right, you add more, as you keep doing more and more of enterprise resource planning, what you'll realize is, the complexity actually increases, from an execution standpoint, right? Because where, in a monolithic structure, it's fairly straightforward to manage a supply chain. But as you sort of, venture out and put in more different, like you say, import substitution or add suppliers, it actually sort of becomes much, the complexity starts sort of getting multiplied. And there also one more thing that has been mentioned by some of the panelists, the role of data actually really starts playing over there, right? I mean, you cannot then work in the same way that you've been working with a monolithic structure. And that's exactly where, visibility and stuff like, blockchain or, advanced technologies or systems, specialized systems over here, really come in. And there are examples of this in many industries, which are actually flourishing despite adding complexity. So, for example, e-commerce is another industry, right, which is continuously adding complexity, but has been able to sort of build a base foundation or a platform that has been enabling them to grow despite the complexity. So in that sense, I think what would really help is, if number one, from a data standpoint, there are certain basic agreements in terms of, how everyone works or how work is done, right? That would definitely help everyone, because then that, of course, sets a good solid foundation, similar to what, for example, e-commerce industry does. So that would be the first thing. And then, of course, digitize and having that push aggressively towards that, whether it's a small supplier, a big supplier, whether it's a truck provider, whether it is a shipping line. I think that push, if it comes from the customers, right, as in from the large OEMs like the Tatas, right, if it comes in, that will really help. Because the thing is that nobody's going to do it otherwise, right? And then it's only when companies like Tata Motors stand up and say, okay, no, this is exactly how I want it, from all my suppliers, from all my supply chain providers, that will really make the big difference. I don't think the technology is a problem. It exists. It's more the adoption and more the intent from large industry players.
It's more about collaboration. See, when you say I want to leverage data, you can't. Let us say Rajiv cannot say that I will generate my own data. You are going to leverage what? You have already the data. So unless and until, the key word is collaboration. Unless and until you decide to collaborate, you cannot have data. Now I can give you an example where it has happened, and it has happened in the Indian Ports Association, which has developed the port community system, which integrates all the 13 major ports of this country. And also the private ports are involved, and all 27 different customers, which includes the shipping lines, freight forwarders, custom brokers, warehousing people, all of them are given free access into that platform. And then there is also a covenant on data security. There is also a covenant on data sharing. There is also a covenant on data analysis. So when you want to analyze data, unless and until you collaborate, there is no analysis of data. So the key element is, see, we are always talking about analysis without telling that we should collaborate. As a person who has seen those levels, it makes no sense in business. It will remain wishful thinking. It will continue to remain wishful thinking till somebody from abroad will impose it on you. Because at that time, you will have no other option but to join. I will give you a very small example. Of course, I don't know why Zishan has not mentioned. There is an international global platform introduced by Myers called TradeLens. Please have a look at it. It can actually integrate all businesses together. Now, if you say that, no, I don't want to be on Myers, so I won't give it. then you have to be on, you have to provide your documents and wait for your turn, isn't it? So the key element is, if you really want to analyze, if you really want to work on data and share for the common good, it doesn't mean that Tata's business secret should be shared across the globe, or Rajesh's business secret should come, or Rajiv's business secret should be shared across the platform, or even Ramani's business secrets will go. Nobody's business secrets will go. They all will remain with you. Shareable information will be analyzed based on common good and common access. Suppose you want the data, you can get those data which are this thing for your analysis. You might be interested in a particular area only. So my request to, because the automotive platform, the automotive industry is actually a very, very closely grouped industry. Of course, it is competitive. There is a concept of cooperative competition as well. This is an area where unless and until you cooperate, all of you will be losers. And by joining in, all of you are going to be gainers, because your market shares, it is only going to reduce your logistics related costs, which presently are too much, especially in India, because of our diffidence in collaborating in collaborative competitions and our diffidence in something called, we have a false notion of data security and data privacy, without knowing what should be private and what is not, when everybody else is known to the neighbor. And we have those, we talk about jargons without knowing how it can be leveraged. And that therein lies our problem. So when the first time, when it was spoken in this, amongst the first words used was collaboration. And we still are there at the same area. And an institute and an institution like the automotive body, like yours, which is so very close knit, you should create it. You will make simply waves. I think I'm echoing the way views of Mr. Ramani as well in this, because 3PL's efficiencies will go mind-boggling. Some of the aspects of storage and all which were spoken will simply go out of the window, because where you have good logistics, you don't need to have subsidiary storage at all. You can, you can always say that I can transport it. But if a part can be transported for a single product, if it is so urgent, it can be transported by air. Now that is also established. So logistics can deliver. And with information, institutions, logistics institutions, 3PL, 4PL organizations can contribute greatly to profits by simply reducing, by actually telling you that please don't store it all, because when I want it, I will take it and I will directly transport it. And that makes much greater sense. I thought great interventions from you on that question. So important.
Mr. Gera, I'll come to you on this very question of collaboration. Now, within the group itself, you talked about 19 companies spread across 59 locations. And then when you look at the outside world, you look at the entire automotive value chain, how are you looking at collaboration? Anand Group, of course, is a huge example of bringing in so many joint ventures together and successfully running it for several decades. What's your view?
So, as far as collaboration is concerned, I just put an example in front. Like we have a policy which we call Anand House of Quality Culture. So that policy, the basis of that policy is, of course, we have to reach to a level where we call it a level 5, which is a world-class level as far as quality performance or delivery or technology or automation or digitization is concerned. But at the same time, there is an underlying, there's a major objective. The second major objective is that our tier 2s and tier 3s should be parallel to what we are doing. So that means the level at which we are moving, they also have to move parallelly along with us to be at the same level where we are going to be. So, these tier 2s and tier 3s probably do not have the bandwidth or do not have the availability of technology and education to be there on their own. So we run a program which is called VSME, which is Visionary Small and Medium Enterprise. So this program which we are running from 2009. I mean, it was launched in December 2009. And so far we have covered 350 suppliers, I mean, Anand Group suppliers, irrespective of the company or the joint venture or whatsoever. So there are 350 suppliers wherein we have already trained them in VSME. Now, when we talk about VSME, there are some basic concepts on which we train the people. So these are basically the flow management is one of the major things on which we teach them. The second is of course Hijunka, the quality management, the safety, the 5S. So all these are bucketed together to ensure that at least they have a quality level which is expected. I mean, at our AHQC, that is at level 1. So that level 1 actually ensures that you have a proper quality standards maintained while delivering the products to the customer. So this is all done in a collaborative manner. I mean, we are not charging a penny to any of our suppliers for this. And these training programs are not only classroom training programs, they are actually physical workshops conducted on the shop floor, creating a model line and then replicating it across the plant. So that is the way it happens. And we have a dedicated team, we call it manufacturing excellence team, those who actually go visit the suppliers, stay with them, work with them, ensure that they come to a level. And then the first level is, of course, as I said, level 1, and then slowly they move to gradually level 2, level 3. So it's a complete hand holding, which is done with these suppliers to bring them to a level which is actually, I mean, we are collaborating in full way with full transparency. What we are doing in our manufacturing footprint is same as replicated to our suppliers' manufacturing footprints, though with a slight delay, but it's there. And that is what we are pulling all our suppliers to collaborate. Information sharing, of course, it happens. When they come to visit us, they come to visit our model lines, our plants. The information is clearly open to them. I mean, what is our efficiency level, at what OEE we are functioning, at what maintenance levels we are functioning. So the data is open to them. They can actually see and analyze from where we have come to what stage, so they can see the data. And the same way, when we go to them, they also share the data so that improvement can be brought in. So there's a clear transparency. And these are the suppliers, those who actually grow with us in VSME are the suppliers, those who are actually getting more and more share of business to ensure that they stay with us and they grow with us. So that's a collaborative approach. As on one of the examples, I thought I'll mention that. And of course, as far as the pandemic is concerned, the financial crisis which happened, I mean, we supported a lot to all our suppliers as far as the financial, financially, I mean, we supported them at a very low interest rates, which were actually comparative interest rates. So that, because going to the bank, it again a challenge, a lot of documentation, a lot of work, a lot of time delays, which happens. So I mean, we actually help them to at least ensure a working capital amount to be there with them. And I think those are clear indicatives of the collaborative approach which we follow at Anand.
Excellent. I'll take a couple of questions that we've received from our participating delegates today. Mr. Satish KG is the Managing Director of JVC Kenwood Marketing, India. He wants to know, he says, ground reality has been clearly brought to the table by all speakers. Hearing about something called tripartite discussions to mitigate such challenges involving OEMs, supplier partner, and the semiconductor maker. Concept-wise, looks very good to take all the stakeholders into confidence. But on practical level, what is the actual success rate as per the experience of experts in the panel? Who would like to take that?
Yeah, I'll go with that because we are using it. So
yes.
It's a very, in fact, almost literally on every alternate day, we are having tripartite meetings with our supplier partners, the tier ones and their suppliers. And I think it is a step in the right direction, because that's what all collaborative working is all about. Since the previous question was related to collaboration, and unless let's say our tier 2 knows about our pain, he would not really be able to visualize and put in those extra efforts which are required. Say for example, we are our volumes have got ramped up significantly. Now, how is this supplier going to be able to assess whether this is a buffer creation by OEM or whether it is genuinely because the volumes are getting ramped up. The volumes may be getting ramped up because of a new launch, because of a gain in the market share and so on. But given in isolation, if he looks at the data, let's say there is another OEM who is well below their earlier numbers, and when they put in their numbers, it seems to be on par with what they have been sourcing so far. Whereas another OEM like us, when we put in our numbers, it is significantly higher than the previous years. Now, how does he differentiate it unless until he has a dialogue with us and understands the perspective? So I think, these meetings are extremely important. And I think, Mr. Siva, Rajiv, everyone has, emphasized on the need for collaboration. I think that's the way to go forward. And we are seeing, excellent results as far as this is concerned.
Arijit Bhattacharya has a question for you, Mr. Gera. He says, how is Anand Group managing the steep price hike of steel? If OEMs are absorbing the cost or component manufacturers need to bite the bullet?
Difficult, Mr. Khatri, to answer in front of you, but I'll try to do that.
That's what I have replied. I have replied the Tata Group is represented through Khatri. He should reply.
I think the ask a question is very intelligent enough to get it from the right spot.
I can only tell you that if you ask the steel guys, they will tell you that it should be more.
Never enough.
No,
for the last 5 years they have been at the receiving end due to global strategies of people to specifically keep the prices of steel down. And now, when it is not possible to subsidize the steel forever, steel prices have found their correct levels. If I have to know, since I have been following it for the last 5 years, I can only tell you that one of the biggest steel outputs coming out of China, they were literally subsidizing it just to keep Indian steel down. And since it could not go on forever, the pandemic, it hit the roadblock, and the steel prices are back to what it should be. That's what will be my reply based on a very global assessment of the understanding of the global economics and politics also. But it may not give you any solace because as far as you are concerned, you are paying more. But frankly speaking, I would say that the steel guys were resilient enough to survive this onslaught speaking from the national point of view. And I can only tell you the steel guys have been resilient to keep it. I think the local manufacturers have supported them by buying it at that price and absorbing the cost at that level, which was being offered to them. And so they are, it's largely on account of what I would still say collaboration of the national steel makers with the national industry. So that's what has happened. If you were to buy my analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gera?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that question. Now, when it comes, I understand the question was more towards compensation of the commodity or the steel price increase from the OEM, right? So, when we talk about collaboration and transparency, we are generally very transparent with the OEMs, and our bill of materials are generally shared with the OEMs, and hence our commodity fluctuations are generally indexed and compensated by the customers, of course Tata Motors as well. So now, to answer that question particularly, the way it has been asked, so the compensation for the commodity has been there, and from years together, because it is already indexed with the OEMs, and we are getting that compensation regularly. Now, this word regularly has meaning because some OEMs compensate you after a quarter, some after 6 months, some after a year. Now, with this situation of such a dynamic change or such a drastic increase in the commodity prices, the OEMs have even gone out of the way and settle you out of turn. Like not Mr. Rajesh, Mr. Khatri, I'll just mention this. Like, for example, Tata Motors in the month of January, I mean, they actually went out of turn to compensate to the suppliers because they were not able to sustain that increase. So that increase is there. And my only message is, I think we should be more transparent to the OEMs at the time of settling the business. And we should be clear what commodity and what quantity are we using, so that that is well indexed with the OEMs and you are compensated adequately as per the cycle set by the OEM. Mr. Khatri, you would like to add anything?
Yeah, just to be fair to what has been just said, I think Rajiv has been very right, and we have been adopting a very fair policy of adjusting the prices the way they should be. However, while doing that, we are very cost conscious, and our efforts towards cost minimization, cost reduction, the VAV efforts, these continue. So there is a lot of effort despite the price increases that are happening in the commodities. We work parallelly along with all our supplier partners. In fact, we are having supplier workshops. Till date, I think in the current year, we've had almost 30 workshops with our supplier partners, whereby we are working with them to generate new ideas, to do the benchmarking of products, and trying to explore every other opportunity to cut down the cost. Having said that, the increase in the commodities has been significantly higher than what can be absorbed. So ultimately, it is being passed out to the market, which all of us are aware, right? So it's not a one-line answer. I think it's a complete cycle, and we continue to be very fair in our transactions while focusing on being cost competitive.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have run out of time for this panel discussion. However, to end, I would like to go around this virtual roundtable one by one, seeking your final comments on the subject. When you say creating more resilient supply chains, what must the industry do? There have been a lot of great suggestions that have come from all of you. Of course, agility, bringing in diversity, bringing in digitalization, bringing in technology, making it more sustainable. There are a lot of these suggestions that have come from all of you. But if I give you 30 seconds each, how would you sum up this discussion? What are your end comments? I'll start with you, Mr. Khatri. Please go ahead.
I think you talked about all those levers, but I would say this is a crucial time for the industry, whether it is automotive or otherwise, to pause, reflect, and take the right actions to build resilient and adaptive supply chains. And when I say supply chains, I'm referring to networks. Focus on collaboration, focus on digitalization, because digitalization is, many times we get lost in the jargon because it's become a jargon. We don't really understand the meaning of digitalization. So we need to look back and try to see how we use the current technology. It may be as simple as creating a very strong dashboard and measure the supplier performance on a day-to-day basis. And that would provide a very early warning signal in case the supplier performance is deteriorating for an organization to take some advanced actions. So, this is something which we need to really apply. So as I said, very crucial time for the industry to sit back and really look at the supply chain and, really work on a supply chain transformation strategy, which is a great opportunity. And as I said, it is only the difficult times which bring in the improvements. And these are the right times for the industry to really, take over and transform.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Gera, your quick comments.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the learnings what this pandemic has given, I mean, the kind of challenges this pandemic has thrown in front of us. I don't think we are going to get these kind of challenges anytime soon in our careers or in our lifetimes. So, in my opinion, I think it's high time to go back to the board. Not to the management board, I'm talking about the blackboard. Do your supply chain footprints, redo your supply chain footprint. Understand all the problems which you have faced during this time and ensure that they are well covered in your new drawing board strategy. Same thing, you have to go back to your manufacturing footprint strategy, has to be redone. I mean, it cannot continue the way it was. I mean, we have learned so many things which we could not even imagine can happen and has happened. And now is the time to actually use these learning to the boards, and then, I mean, to our blackboards, redo the strategies, be it supply chain, be it manufacturing, or be it a digitization strategy. And then I think sky is the limit, and I think we can be resilient, we can be receptive, we can be responsive, and we can deliver. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ramani, your final comments.
Look, I think let's kind of end this. Let's look at it a little positively, right? Adversity of this nature obviously makes you dig deep and try to figure out what to do with life in general, with the situation in specific. But you know, the thing about these adversities is two things. One, they pass, which is a inevitable nature of adversities. And the second is, it's a huge opportunity. Clearly, the share markets are seeing this opportunity better than probably some of us here are seeing it. And I think there is a very nice learning there. What are the opportunities you can get out of it? Certainly, one of the things that we have gotten out of it, we won't be meeting like this. We'd be meeting in a hotel. And figuring out when it's going to be lunchtime. So I think we have extracted a huge amount of opportunities from this.
Right.
I think Maersk is laughing their way to the bank. We are not, but Maersk is, right? Because clients never had it so good. That's why he's smiling. I think Tata Motors has ridden this wave like, if only there are heavy commercial vehicles sold, but right now I think the cars are just selling like nobody's blazes. Companies that are in tier 1 because of this are going to get hugely benefited, because people are going to slowly switch. It's not going to happen abruptly, but they're going to slowly switch and create alternate supply bases in India from China. All of a sudden, meeting virtually has become much more effective. So your speed of engaging, speed of collaborating, speed of decision making, all it requires you is to plan a Zoom meeting. If I want to talk to Rajiv Gera next, I just have to set up a Zoom meeting. I have to figure out his calendar and say, how do I travel? Kaun sa bus loon, kaun sa train loon, kaun sa flight? None of those things, right? I think we have learned a lot of great things through this. And I keep telling some of my friends on a lighter vein, we also learned that we can manage with a lot less than we could in the past. So hopefully these lessons will stay with us. And hopefully as we walk past this, and human memory is very short in these matters, we just push this under the carpet very quickly. Hopefully when 6 months or 8 months from now, COVID is fully behind us, and hopefully the Delta variant doesn't come and spoil the party here. I think hopefully we retain a lot of these learnings. We meet more often, we meet more virtually, we collaborate a lot more. We use digitization, which is a lot of data. And he's right, Rajesh Shashkathi is right in this, everybody's got the words mixed up. But hopefully we retain these key things and leverage to create far more elastic supply chain networks. Resilience, a lot of resilience is related to the word elastic, how elastic we are to be able to manage huge variations. Hopefully we retain some of these things. I'm hopeful of a very bright future. I know that right now it's all a little gloomy, but I think we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot how to manage these things.
Right. Excellent. Mr. Sivashalam, your final comments, 30 seconds.
My comment on this will be that time has come for the industry-wide association to plan for cooperative competition. That's where future and immediate gains of this of organization lies. And whatever may be your individual ability to create things, if you want to leverage data, you have to leverage it industry-wide. And you need to have those institutions built in the industry forums. Maybe it need not be just one, it can be many, but together they should be able to collaborate across network across platforms. It is not that there should be a single platform. There can be many platforms, but the collaboration needs to be across tires in the industry. Give you one very small practical thing which has happened. Every truck which leaves Gurgaon with Maruti cars to Chennai goes back to Delhi with Hyundai cars. So that is all. That's a very simple example of what I would call cooperative competition, and it has to become industry wide. If you have to really make it international level, which I think this industry has now, is at the threshold of it, and I would be grateful if the industry works it out entirely fine. I mean, you could go about it with a lot of restrictions, keep on reducing it through your bodies, where each one of you is known to each other, and that's the way forward. That's what will be my message to the industry. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Jishan, I give you the last word, your final comments.
Thanks so much, Dipanshu. I think everyone's mentioned everything I wanted to say, to be honest. But I'll just say this, that whilst all of us are individually redrawing our strategies, the world at large is also redrawing their plans. India stands at a unique position to take advantage. This is a situation that, although it's been tough, there's lots of opportunity. Like what Mr. Ramani mentioned, there's a lot of opportunity, and Indians in general have been very actually. If we are able to capitalize on that, I would just leave it at that. That if we're able to take the learnings, if we're able to capitalize on those, and if we're able to sustain those, then this is an opportunity for us as a country.
Excellent. Although we discussed a lot of challenges today, we discussed difficulties. We are ending on a very positive note, with everyone sort of agreeing that there is this unique opportunity for the Indian industry, not to just remain resilient or become more resilient, but actually, become leaders in this space. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being a wonderful panel. And I hope you enjoyed the panel as much as I enjoyed moderating it. Thank you so much.